Well, hello everyone. Welcome to health interview number 5. And as you can see, I'm with my good friend Shakira Forde, and you've probably heard from her before. If you go to the Fort Myers Seventh-day Adventist YouTube page, she recently gave a seminar on prayer and fasting, and she also shared a little bit about her testimony and what she does in her prayer life. And as a good friend of mine, both of us are really involved in health, but particularly how it pertains to our spirituality. So tonight we're just going to pick her brains about what are some of the changes she's made in her life and what are some of the benefits that she's gleaned. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you're
And maybe
welcome.
just start with, maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you're from, your background, and how you got into health.
Sure. Okay. So I am originally from Miami. So I'm not too far from home, but I live in Fort Myers with my dear husband. We've been married for only a couple years, only 2 years. I work for the school district, the public school system as a social worker, and I've been a Seventh-day Adventist my whole life. I was in the church when I was young, but I didn't really have that relationship with God as I should have. Went off to college, did my thing, and then got rebaptized. And now I actually have a genuine relationship with God. So praise God for that and His providence in keeping me throughout all of that. And that would pretty much be about it. We just like to study and be involved in our church and just spend time with family. So, what got me interested in health was, I would say, more when the pandemic hit in March of 2020. I was actually overseas when everything kind of shut down, and coming back, I was kind of worried about my sanity since my job had, shut down and we were working from home through the school district. And so I was kind of worried about being at home and just not going out at all. So I started walking in the mornings and the afternoons in order to just get out and get my mind kind of cleared. And at that time, I was actually reading Ellen White's books. I don't remember what book I was reading, but I'd read a couple over the years, and I know I was reading one at that time. And so I know a lot of her books touch on health. So even though they may not be as focused on health, like her books like Counsels on Diet and Foods and Counsels on Health, a lot of her books still do emphasize health throughout various chapters. And so I started walking, and I felt like a great benefit for myself mentally. Like I felt like I was able to go into work, like not into it, but into my little work from home space, and I just had a very clear mind, and I just felt good about myself. I just felt good about, everything, I guess. And I was trying to actually lose weight at that time. And so I started walking for weight loss, and then I said I have to change my diet because it's not just the exercise, it's the diet part. So it was a combination of reading her writings and then the pandemic and having more time to actually walk and focus on my health, more time to cook good meals and more time to, eat things that were look into things that were beneficial for me. So it was really the pandemic that kind of like kickstarted my health journey.
And were there some changes that were like relatively easy to make?
For me, I would say incorporating more plant-based foods into my diet. Like, one thing I know a lot of people have like mixed feelings on kale. I will just eat kale raw because it doesn't have a taste for me, so I'll eat it because it doesn't taste bad. Um, and I know that it's healthy. I know it's something that, has a lot of nutrients. I think it's considered like a superfood or super vegetable. So just incorporating more plant-based items into my diet where I think it felt a little bit more simple. And even just eating like more fruits like strawberries, mangoes, things that are pretty easy to come by on a regular basis in Florida or in Southwest Florida. Um, those things don't really take a lot of prep time. You just wash the fruits, make sure they're clean before you eat them. So just incorporating those little things into my diet, even before I made certain major changes, just incorporating those other things into my diet were pretty easy for me, I would say.
Were there any changes that were a little bit more difficult? Like they were worth it, but you had to work a little harder on those?
Yeah, for me, the biggest one was giving up meat. I think first I like my transition was like has been years long. Like I at first I stopped with dairy and then I stopped with like the processed food like chips and or like like bag chips and stuff like that. And then it was just really progressive. But for me, like the hardest one was giving up meat because it just my family is Jamaican and a big part of Jamaican culture or dishes are have meat. And I think that's probably worldwide, but we're well known for like curry chicken and jerk chicken and those kind of meat dishes. And so giving that up when I'd grown up on it was really challenging for me. So that was like the hardest thing was like giving up. That was like the last thing. Like I was able to stop eating like donuts and like processed sweets. I gave up dairy. Um, I was able to give up a good amount of things that I knew were not helpful, but the meat was like the hardest one for me.
Does it get easier with time?
It definitely does. And I think also with experience, like just seeing what, you know, I don't want to say, I guess you could say substitutes, things that give you that same kind of I guess maybe not really taste, but just substitutes, I guess, for certain items, especially with meat. For a while, I craved meat. It was like the hardest thing to go out to eat with people, and like, they'd be eating meat, and you'd be like, I'd be like drooling over their
Right,
food.
right.
But for me, it got a lot easier. And then as I saw the items that I was really able to eat, like I feel like I have a much wider diet now in eating plant-based than I did when I ate meat. Like I feel like I was very limited in what I would eat when I ate meat, but then now I realized that there's like a whole world open to me as far as like the different types of fruits and vegetables and how you can combine things. And it feels like it took several months for me to get more comfortable, but I think that over time and with experience and seeing what worked for me and what I liked and all that, it really got a lot easier.
Is there like five foods that are your favorite, or five foods you would consider superfoods, like foods that are really nutrient dense, or maybe your favorites? It's hard to choose, I know, but is there
Yeah.
like maybe five, seven you narrow it down to?
Yeah. I would say quinoa. That's one of mine. I guess if that counts as a grain, I hope.
Yeah.
So quinoa, like I like to make a quinoa fried rice. So it's like fried rice, but obviously it's just quinoa, not rice. So quinoa, I would say kale. I mean, like I said, it doesn't have a taste for me, so it's easy for me to eat that and know that it's healthy, and I feel good about that. Um, I would say also I like fruits. Dates are a big one for me because they're sweet and I like sweets and you're getting it's natural and it's sweet at the same time. And then I like mangoes and also like strawberries because they're just so easy. Like strawberries are so easy to eat, like just quick finger food. Blackberries, blueberries, I like the berries, bananas. So mainly fruits I like, I would say more than vegetables, but those would probably be my top maybe like seven or so.
Yeah, you like pretty much named all my favorite foods as well. So, and a question for you in regards to like your diet and your spirituality. When you started making these changes, did you notice a difference in your devotional life? Did you notice a difference in like maybe your conscience being convicted? Because a lot of people say like diet doesn't really matter, but did you notice a difference at all?
I feel like I felt like I had a better conscience because I knew that I was following the light that God had given to us through Ellen White as far as the diet reform. And I mean, it's even in the Bible, God's initial design for us, according to, Genesis 1, was for us to eat plant-based diet. So I felt convicted. I felt, like I was following the light that I had. Um, and I do feel like I I feel like my mind is a little bit clearer, like especially at work, like I can ask God a question and I feel like impressed with the answer, or like it just feels easier to just kind of have that communication with God. So I do feel like I feel healthier and my mind is just clearer now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, I feel like I'm less irritable and less critical, like when I have a healthier diet. Like, I notice that, like, if I cheat a little bit, eat a little bit of
Mhm.
this or a little bit of that, I feel like I'm more easily irritated. I don't know if
Yeah.
other people notice that, but I notice it for myself.
Yeah.
So what about, because I understand like it's something that we want to tread lightly on because like we never want to hit anyone over the head with health reform. But there's a lot of people, particularly in the amateur church, who feel like it doesn't matter. Do you have like any like counsels for people that are like, oh, it's not a salvation issue, it really doesn't matter?
Um, I know that Ellen White has written, and I'm not going to be able to quote it verbatim, but she has made a statement about like when you're eating certain things that are overstimulating to the mind and they are causing you not to have good health, it's like it's harder for God to be able to truly communicate with us because our mind is where, God speaks to us. He speaks to us and we're able to hear him. And when we are eating things that are causing our minds to be clouded or causing us to um just be in a state where we're not in good health, it's not pleasing to God ultimately. So it is a very important issue, and I know it's sensitive, it's challenging, especially the older you are and the harder habits may be to break, but I do believe that it is something that God wants us to get victory over. It was obviously a salvation issue for Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah in Daniel 2. And so, or I'm sorry, Daniel 1. So it was clear that there was a correlation between their choice to eat better and God blessing them and God honoring them, and then God giving them that kind of wisdom that they needed and the knowledge they needed to be to stand before King Nebuchadnezzar and be a be be someone in his courts, I guess you could say, that was knowledgeable and was learned and skilled. So since it was an issue for them at that time, then I do believe that it's an issue for us now. And we can see that God honored them in Daniel 1. And so I believe that those who are faithful to diet reform and having that understanding and living up to the light they have, that God will honor. So I do believe that it's very important, because I see in myself that the more I'm able to abstain from certain things, I have a lot higher level of self control. Um, and that's going to be something that's important, especially as prophecy continues to be fulfilled and time is coming to a close. We're going to have self control. We're going to have to be able to um, stand out and be different. My coworkers notice that I don't eat the same things that they eat, and I try not to ever make it seem like I'm better than them because I don't eat certain things. I try to, I don't really say anything unless they ask me. They'll
Right,
ask
right,
me, "Oh, do you want cake?" And I'll just say no. I don't say because I don't eat, certain
right.
things. But we have to be comfortable with being different and standing out and being peculiar. But I do believe that it is, a salvation issue. It is something that is really important for us if we have the light. For
Right,
those of us
right.
who don't have the light, people died before they were able to understand diet reform. God understands those limitations, but if God has given us the light on diet reform and the importance of it, and it's coming from the world, even the world is able to see, there's people who are atheists, who are vegetarian because they know that, a plant-based diet is better for them than a diet filled with, heavily processed foods. So to me, I do think that it is a salvation issue if we have the light on it. And it helps us to develop more self-control. It helps us to be comfortable with being different, and it helps us to have our bodies in a condition where God is able to speak to us because he we have a mind that's more clear, we have a conscience that's more clear as well. So it definitely is, something that people need to consider more than just very, just something lightly that they lightly regard it. It's something that they need to put into serious prayer and study it as well.
Yeah, I really like how you articulated that. And as people are listening, like, some people I'm sure are really health conscious, and then there's probably other people that are convicted, which is a good thing. Conviction's actually a beautiful thing. So,
Mhm.
what tips do you have for people that like they know they need to make some changes, but they've just kind of dilly-dallied? Do you have any like suggestions for people that like some easy suggestions, ways for them
Mhm.
to start small?
I would say to work more on inclusion than exclusion. I do think eventually you should work on getting to a point where you exclude certain things, but if you feel like it's too challenging to exclude certain things, and start incorporating better things into your diet. One thing that I do when I'm eating is I'll start with like the healthier option first. I mean, most of what I eat is pretty healthy. I don't want to say, I'll start with the healthiest option first and then I move on to like five hamburgers.
Right.
But I mean, there's like certain, like I tend to make like homemade desserts, and I will start with like the healthiest thing on my plate first, so that if I'm full, I may not even have time for like a homemade dessert. So I like to like, I think one thing I would suggest, I would say, would be start with like whatever's healthy. So if you can fill yourself up on kale and carrots or something, something else, then you may not feel as hungry for something that's unhealthy that you have on your plate, if that makes sense. But I would definitely also suggest starting with inclusion. So just including more plant-based items like those leafy green vegetables, fruits that are easy to find that may not be, budget breaking or anything. So just starting with things that are easier for you to include. And then as you do that, you will be able to exclude certain things. So if you have a plate filled with strawberries and mango, and then you also have some donuts. If you start with the strawberries and mangoes first and you get full, you won't even want to eat the donut. So I would just say just starting with those things. And then one thing I also did was I started excluding things that were easy for me to exclude. So I was never a big like dairy person. I was never big on drinking cow's milk. I was never big on cheese. I would have them, but they weren't things that I felt like I needed to have. So when I realized that they weren't healthy or they weren't fit for human consumption, I was able to just say, okay, this is easy. I'll just make this a permanent change in my diet. So I made it permanent to exclude cow's milk. I made it permanent to exclude like cheese and other dairy items. So for me, just starting with what was easy for me. So I know that there was someone at church that mentioned that for her, not eating meat was really easy. So for her, if that was the easiest place to start, then I would start with excluding meat. So I would say to include more and then exclude whatever you feel is it's easy for you to exclude. So if you're not big on like sweets or like processed sweets, then go ahead and make that a permanent change in your diet. So just starting with those little items.
I like it because I think my husband, he follows Dave Ramsey a lot, and I think it's something called the snowball effect. Like you start with something easy and then you feel real good and it's like easier,
Right.
it takes off
To
like a
make the
snowball.
changes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So yeah, I love that. And what about for people like maybe people like us who I would consider us relatively healthy? We're trying to live up to the light that has been shown to us. But what are some things you think like Adventists who have been living out the health message could do? Like, are there any practices that you've recently integrated or things that you've done that like you've really noticed a difference? Like, do you have any recommendations for already healthy people who just want to be healthier?
I would say the the acronym New Start, is part of the health message. Nutrition, exercise, water, sunlight, temperance, air, rest, and trust in God. So I would say looking at the whole aspect of New Start because I think we focus on diet a lot and diet is very important. It is, probably the primary one, but also looking at getting proper, exercise, making sure you're hydrated, you're getting, proper sunlight, you're temperate in what you eat because Ellen White does say that even if we eat healthy food, if we're overeating, then
Yeah.
it still can be detrimental to us. So making sure you're temperate, you're getting proper air, you're getting proper rest, and then you're trusting in God because ultimately you can do all those things. And if you don't trust in God, then it's not going to benefit you as it should, like someone who has a genuine relationship with God. So I would say just looking at the whole picture. And then I think also I know that, I know we had this conversation about walking and,
Right.
power walking. I love walking and I think it's a beneficial exercise. And I know it's said, I don't know exact reasons, but I know Ellen White has said that it's a really good exercise. It employs like all of the uses of your body. Your arms are moving, your legs, your lungs, your heart rate's up. So, I think it can be overlooked as an exercise. So I think, if you can or someone who can incorporate that as a form of exercise or movement. Um, I've also heard like just helping with digestion after a meal, taking a short walk. That's something that I think most of us don't do. I'm guilty when I'm at work. It's like just kind of eat your food and then go back to work since you're so busy. So just being more, what's the word, intentional with your habits, being more mindful of certain things and just incorporating a holistic approach to health and looking at, all the different aspects of health. Because if you're eating properly, but you're getting like 3 hours of sleep a night, that's still going to be, you're not going to be in the best health that you can be. So just looking at yourself from a holistic point of view and incorporating those little changes where you can. I know for me, like we have I work in like a really big building and so some people will leave our office to go down the hall to get to use the bathroom. So that's what I'll do just to get some extra steps in for the day, get my limbs moving after sitting for certain, period of time. So trying to be more intentional in my habit as far as walking more and doing those kinds of things throughout the day. So I would say just being intentional about your habits and understanding, any limitations that you have and just how to work around those.
And I like how you mentioned New Start because I think on March 20 we're going to have a Bible study on New Start, and then I think
Okay.
are you presenting on the 27th, aren't you? On
Mm-hmm.
like, do you mind giving us like a brief synopsis of what you're going to go over?
Sure. So I am going to discuss tips on transitioning to a plant-based diet. Like I said, my transition was years long, and some of it wasn't even intentional. I never intended to get off of meat. It was just things that I was like, okay, let me stop drinking dairy, drinking milk and stuff. And then it just became progressive, I would say. But I'm going to go through tips of on how to transition into a plant-based diet based on my experience. So it's not going to be anything that, I've discussed with like a doctor or nutritionist or anything. These are just things that have worked for me. So things that might make it easier for people in transitioning, things that I found to be helpful. And then I also want to discuss recipes that I think would be beneficial for people, healthy recipes that are, plant-based. They don't have any like meat or dairy, nothing processed. Mainly substitutes for things that we would normally have. So like even just one example would be like queso, the cheese, the liquid cheese, I guess. Instead of buying that or buying something store bought, you can make it out of potatoes and carrots, and you just blend it up with some almond milk and some other ingredients, and you can make your own queso. So, I mean, and I put that over broccoli, I've put that over potatoes. So, just recipes that are similar to what we already kind of eat or what we're familiar with, but they're going to be plant-based. So they can kind of help people to feel more comfortable in transitioning if they know that they can still have the same types of things, but it's just healthier.
That sounds amazing because I do a lot of cheeses with cashews and it tastes good, but you have to be careful because the calories can add up real quick. So
Yeah.
potatoes and carrots, I mean, that's amazing. You could have
Yeah.
like half a cup of cheese or something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds
I
really
had it.
good.
I finished mine this morning. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, awesome. And I think that's on Monday, March 27, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this. You'll see Shakira from Bible study, on Mondays. You might see her at church from time to time. So thank you for sharing with us, Shakira. I know that I always like talking with you because I learned a lot. And I pray that this was a blessing as well. So have a good night, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us.